And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're joining us for, I believe this is the penultimate session of, I think, what was a massively successful TMF week. Super excited to present our next session and our next guests. But before we get into that, my name is Aviv Lubel. I am your host for today's session. And I am a senior account executive here at Montreal, and I'm really happy to be with you guys today. So just a few housekeeping points here. All of the sessions that we are doing today are going to be recorded. And in fact, everything we've done over the course of the week is going to be recorded, and they're going to be made available to all of you attendees. You're going to be receiving a certificate attendance, not just for the individual sessions that you're attending, but for the entire TMF week. The questions, and we encourage everyone to ask as many questions as you can. The questions are going to be answered at the end of the session. And of course, after every session, we have our networking break, and we encourage everyone to take a few moments, hit the lounges, and speak to some of your colleagues from around the world. And also in the chat section, feel free to tell us where you are joining us from, because I think here on our little session, we have quite an eclectic geographical mix of attendees. So what is the session timeline today? Our amazing speakers are going to be speaking for about 30 minutes. After that, we are going to transition to our Q&A. We'll spend about 15 minutes answering all of your amazing questions. I'll be introducing our, and I'm sad to say this, I think it's going to be our final session for TMF week. And then, of course, we have the networking break, which I always encourage everyone to join. So without further ado, I would like to present A Quiet Place: Mitigating the Risk of eTMF Transfers and Migrations. And joining me today is Nisi Nazim, as well as Angel Ramos. And I will hand it off to you to do the formal introductions and to get everything started.
Great. Thank you so much, Aviv. I just wanted to welcome everyone to A Quiet Place: Mitigating the Risks of eTMF Transfers and Migrations. Before I started, I just wanted to check, does everybody know, or have you watched A Quiet Place? If you have, just say yes in the chat. For those who haven't watched it, it's a horror film directed and written by John Krasinski from the Office TV show, with his wife Emily Blunt. So right now they're on to their second sequel around now. So we thought it would be fun to kind of do a theme of A Quiet Place. So Nisi, did you want to do the thing?
Yep, if you could just go on to the next slide, Angel.
Okay. So this is just our disclaimer. All the views in our presentation are those of Nisi Nazim and myself, and the use of any media here is fair use for educational purpose only. Our bios should be in the decks that will be shared, but essentially I've worked since 2006 in the pharma records space, and in TMF for over 4 years. Nisi?
Welcome to A Quiet Place. So I'm Nisi Nazim, been with Beijing for 2 years now, and very much passionate about clinical systems. I have over a decade experience working in clinical systems, from TMF to CTMS, safety vigilance. And I love everything about TMF and have quite a lot of experience with migrations and transfers. So welcome.
Yes, and we're going to be talking about risks. So we thought having a horror show where they're trying to avoid the risks of monsters who can hear exceptionally well but can't see would be a good parallel for the dangers and risks associated with transfer migration. So, Sure. So next slide. We're going to be talking about transfers and migrations, the what, why, when, and how, risks, proven practices, a couple of case studies, and then we'll finish with takeaways. So right now we're going to go to a poll.
All right, and I will help moderate this poll. So I'm actually afraid to speak now. I feel like I need to be quiet or else. So the poll is: when did you last participate in transfers or migrations? Was it anywhere between 2 and 5 years ago? Was it last year? Are you currently migrating and transferring studies? And I can't see the last question there. Let's see here. Or not done any transfers or migrations at all. And we'll wait for the poll results to come in.
And there is no right answer to this. Organizations will have different numbers of studies and at different maturity and different stages. There's no right.
And I know Kim is working in the control room right now, and I'm sure she will pop up the results in just a few moments. Just so everyone knows, we have about 40 people working in a control room, making sure that everything goes smoothly. I'm kidding. All right, Kim, you want to pop the results? Okay, here we go. So we have 2 to 5 years ago, about a third of all participants. Last year, about 13 and change. Currently migrating or transferring studies, close to 40%, and not migrating anything at all. We are at 17%. So I'll allow you to analyze those responses.
Yeah, so it sounds like for close to the majority of the folks here that this session today will be especially relevant. So thank you for participating in that. So transfers matter, migrations matter. Now we're going to be talking about the what, why, when, and how. So here are some definitions that that come from MHRA, GXP Data Integrity Guidance. So as far as data transfers, it's the process of transferring data between different storage types, formats, or computerized systems. For data migration, it's the process of moving stored data from one durable storage location to another, which may include changing data format, but not the content or meaning. So data transfer procedures should include a rationale and be robustly designed and validated to ensure data integrity is maintained throughout the data lifecycle. So you can think of data transfers as going between one organization and another, and migrations as being more internal, although it can be definitely from one system to another. It can be from one version of a system to another as well. So for the why, we're looking, why does transfers and migrations of trial master file, which is what we're going to be looking at here, from one authoritative system to another, why is that important? Well, obviously, there's the story of the clinical studies, and it's important that you be able to tell that. So it's not just about the content, but you need to maintain the context as well. Additionally, there are long-term retention requirements based on your organization's retention schedules. The TMF and other clinical records need to be maintained a long time. So with Europe with the EU 536/2014. It could be 25 years after study closure. For Health Canada, 15 years after. And in addition to that, there's a continual changing software vendor landscape, as well as technological advancements that may require you to move to a new system or new storage locations. And finally, the regulation as well. So this moves us then to the next slide for the regulatory requirements and guidances. So I had mentioned the European regulation number 536/2014. There are also guidelines. So EMA has a guideline on content management and archiving of clinical trial master files, as well as the guideline on computerized systems. These are useful for validating and system requirements that are needed for maintaining clinical studies and the eTMF. The EMA guidance on content management and archiving mentions traceability and alterations in data. So that would be your metadata, your audit trails, and so forth. And there's a guidance that you should have data integrity systems by design. So out of the box, you should create something that is going to work for you. For the ICH E6R3 draft, that also is going to bring up a lot of the same traceability and data reconciliation aspects that were mentioned in the EMA guidances. And as well, it's the FDA data integrity and compliance with drug CMP is another one that you should look at as far as requirements. If you go to the ISPE GAMP 5, as well as the GAMP the GAMP guide on records and data integrity, you would be hitting the baseline requirements for GXP systems as far as what you should have in your system to be able to ensure that you're able to capture the full context of your data, so that it's a full record that can tell the story of your clinical studies. So next slide. With that, I think I'm going to be passing this to my colleague Nisi.
Thanks, Angel. So we talked about what the transfer is all about and why we're doing a transfer. Now, when do we typically do a transfer migration? So we usually see transfers and migration happening whenever we are moving from a legacy system. Your system is outdated, you want to bridge a new system. That's typically when you would see a transfer or a migration. Maybe you have multiple authoritative TMF sources within your organization and you want to do a centralized one. That's again another reason why you would want to do like a TMF migration. It also happens when we have new alliances, we have mergers and acquisitions, when we move towards a new business model. So let's say you had an outsourced model and now you're going to internalize most of your clinical trials. So you have a new business model and you want to do all your transfers and migrations, right? So that's another area when we see this kind of activity happening. Or what's predominantly seen in this industry is you have trials are outsourced, and you have an interim transfer from your CROs or AROs during the conduct of a study, or the study closes and completes, and then you do a final study transfer. If you move to the next slide, Angel, for me, thank you. So pretty much next of our session is going to be focusing on the how. So we'll be covering about risks, right? So one thing before you do a migration and transfer, you should always understand what are the potential risks that can happen during this phase and how we can mitigate those risks. So the earlier that you identify such risks and you try to mitigate it would really help you through that process. Try to follow proven practices. I'm just going to take you through those proven practices. And if you've already done multiple rounds of transfers and migrations in your organizations, always make sure you capture those lessons learned and try to kind of use those lessons into your next set of transfers and migrations. And lastly, always make sure that you're complying with Alcoa Plus principles. If you take a look at the graph, this is from a recent survey. Much of the 483 and warning letters issued by the FDA is on accuracy and completeness. So this also kind of ties into transfers and migrations, because we need to make sure that the data that we receive at the end of the day is accurate and the TMF is complete. What's also important is data integrity. So as he just mentioned in the guidelines, right, it's important for us to ensure that we maintain that data integrity. So we'll take you through all of these steps in the next half of the session. So Angel, if you want to do the next slide. So what are the risks to the TMF transfers and migrations? Next slide. All right, so here are some of the risks that you should keep an eye out for whenever you do a transfer and migration. The first is obviously the system. We need to make sure that what we have in place as a target or the source is a GXP validated system. So non-GXP valid systems have minimal or no audit trails. So typically what we hear is, yes, our systems are validated, but are they really valid towards GXP requirements? Do we have a robust audit trails? Do we have a metadata generation capability? So that's some of the key things you need to look out for. The next thing that you need to look out for are documents, especially in the file format. So think about compressed files, your zip files. Do you think your target system can take those? Should you consider decompressing those files? What about if the study is a legacy study, right, and you have not accessed the study for quite some time? Do you think some of the files could be corrupted, especially if the file formats are not are in the legacy file formats, right? Audit trails. So again, not just documents, but audit trails are all equally important, especially in the TMF space. So is the audit trail accessible? Do you think that the format of the audit trail is viewable in the target GXP system? Are they legible enough? Do they, follow the 21 CFR Part 11 requirements, right? So those are things you should look out for, especially for a source audit trail. Supplemental documents or supporting documents that you typically expect during a transfer migration. So for example, document inventory. So does the source have a inventory file listing all of the files expected in the transfer? Do they have a supplemental metadata file? So you have a file, but do you have supporting metadata for the file? Again, audit trails is one of the supplemental files. Data integrity checks. So as I mentioned, it's important for us to kind of make sure that the content of the data that we receive maintains the integrity of the TMF. So which means that we probably would need checksums, right? So can the source provide checksums? Do you think the checksum algorithm used by the source is the same as in the target? The next is missing or hard to access key metadata. So yes, we have a source and we have a target. So we have to know what are the requirements from the target. So do we have necessary date fields, right? Document dates is an important metadata for TMF. Do we need personal name information like principal investigator, right? Do we need blinding status of the documents out of the study? Do we need language? So these are some of the requirements you could potentially consider, especially from the target side, and see if you need to get those similar information from the source. And then lastly, is the structure that's followed in the source complying with CDISC TMF reference model? So if not, then that's a potential risk. So here are some of the risks that I've outlined here and that you need to watch out for. So now, how do we mitigate the risk? So let me turn on my transmitter and amplifier, and over to you, Angel.
Yeah, thank you. So in mitigating risks, it's important that you walk in your own steps or steps that others in your industry have taken. And that's why we have this section, proven practices as opposed to best practices, because these are practices that you've walked before You understand you need to be quiet for whatever eTMF monsters are out there that can hear what you're doing. So in this section, we'll be talking about establishing a process, planning and scoping your projects, data preparation, as well as data integrity, QC validation type steps. So here we have an example of a process map that you might have for your data migrations and transfers. And it's going to kick off, like Nisi had said previously, either due to some business decision model that you might be moving active in-flight studies over to your organization, or there might be a cancellation, completion, or termination of a study, and then it needs to just be moved to the sponsor or sponsor's third party for storage. So you've got that initial trigger to start it, and then it goes over to the sponsor to go through a process where they can start the conversation between the source system and target system owners to start the transfer. So you're taking your steps along the path that many people have stepped before, but primarily every time you go, you need to reach some kind of agreement. Every study transfer needs its own agreement between the original source system owners and the destination eTMF system owners. So you need to have a meeting of minds on some kind of transfer agreement, and then once agreed to, you should be using some kind of GXP secure transfer mechanism. That could be the CROs, it could be the sponsors. You need to decide on that, hopefully in a kickoff meeting between the two. And then once transferred, it's going to reside either in the a staging area repository, or if it's going directly into your eTMF system, you're going to have some kind of GXP validated transfer platform for that as well. After transfer, there's going to need to be the review. So it's really important to make sure that the data that you receive is what was sent according to the data inventories and metadata files and so forth. So you need to conduct that data integrity QC, not to be confused with the functional QC. And then finally, you're going to take whatever was very specific about the study, and if, for example, a legacy study didn't have audit trails, or they weren't as detailed as you would have liked based on your expectations, then you're going to put that information in your migration memo and file that in your TMF. We would file it in 01-01-01, but you might file that somewhere else. And once all the data integrity checks are done, you can send an acknowledgement of receipt to your CRO or your academic research organization. And then here is just a very high level timeline of what we're looking at for the transfer. So this is your path. Your path is going to be over a period of 3 to 4 months, where you're starting with a kickoff meeting, trying to reach consensus on your eTMF transfer agreement. Then once everybody agrees, you're going to start your transfer and have a review period, which can last up to 3 months, where you're doing your data integrity checks, your document sampling, and so forth, before issuing a final acknowledgement of receipt. So with that, let's see. With that, I will be passing it to, I think I'll be sticking with this for one more slide. Sorry, Nisi. So here we are looking at the planning and scoping. So under this, we need to, of course, define the scope. So the number of studies, their status, whether they're completed or you're dealing with in-flight or active studies, what types of studies, and if there's any blinding considerations, And then, of course, you absolutely must at least have your source and target systems identified. And then there needs to be some kind of agreement on the strategy that you're approaching the studies. Are you going to do all of your studies all at once? I know 40% of you are in the process of transfers and migrations. It probably might not be a great idea if you've got dozens of studies to be transferring them all at once. You might need a phased approach, and you probably want to be starting with a proof of concept with a select number of studies. You also need to finalize your expectations for the transfer. So what sort of things do you need? Do you need certain file formats? Are you excluding certain file formats that are not viewable in your eTMF system? All of this should be in your transfer expectations, and then this will filter down into your eTMF transfer plans, and as well as your migration plans from internal system to system. You'll be agreeing on that in a kickoff meeting between the CRO or academic research organization, as well as the sponsor or their third party. And then finally discussing timelines and what's acceptable. So are they going to put in language information? Are they just going, are you going to have to rely on other things to be able to capture certain metadata? And then finally, just an agreement on your formats, your TMF index, metadata, and audit trails, which hopefully would be available. So with that, I'll be passing it to Nisi.
Thanks, Angel. So now that we have scoped out what we need for transfer migrations, we move into data preparation. So there's 4 steps to this. So the first step is obviously to review all those supplemental files, such as your document inventory, which lists all the necessary documents that's included in the transfer to migration package. You have your metadata file. So in some cases, you might find that this is kind of combined with the document inventory file. So you might have one instead of 2 separate inventory metadata file. As long as you in the file, you can clearly identify what type of document is, your artifact, your classification, that's needed at a minimum. And then if possible, include all the required metadata that's needed for the target system. Audit trail file, as I said, is it one audit trail file for the entirety of the study, or is it individual audit trails for the documents? What is the format of the audit trail? Like, is it CSV format? Is it PDF? Can you open it? Is it accessible in the target? So those are the key things you need to kind of look out for. And if possible, do like a document sampling, right? So get sample documents from the source. It can be different file formats. You can have multiple versions of the same kind of document. So here are things you should kind of review, before you even start the transfer and the migrations. So once you've reviewed all of those supplemental files, you kind of move into the mapping phase. So you have a source, metadata file, and obviously it's this, it's not going to be 100% matching with the target. So you kind of have to see if there's any dependencies, right? There are things that you could look out for. Let's say the source has listed, sub artifacts as an individual artifact in their source system. You probably would need to kind of map it to the same artifact in the target. So you would have to kind of build the dependencies. Cleansing. So this is one step that people typically kind of forget, right? So they're like, I just want to get all my TMF into the target, and then you kind of do the QC and you realize, what, things are not where they should be. So you need to look, as and when you're reviewing all the supplemental files and sampling, you can keep an eye out for things that is expected in your target. Very simple things that you could look out for are date formats, right? So your target, specifically is year, month, and day, right? But in the source, they give it in some random format that you're not clear, like it's 2-digit dash 2-digit dash 2-digit. So you don't know if it starts with the year, you don't know if it starts with the month, you don't know if it starts with the day, right? So you need to kind of, during your review process, if you come across these kind of formats, that's the time when you can go back and say, hey, should the source cleanse it or give us a metadata file in a different date format? You could also look out for inaccurate dates. I've come across many scenarios where I've seen dates like, as an example, 1924, So you'd probably think, oh, wow, is that study running for like 100 years now? So again, that's no. So you should go back and say, oh, there's something wrong. So maybe the source have not done their proper QC, right? So it's best that, if possible, get those corrected in the source, especially if you're doing a study conduct. It's a good time to get those corrected in the source itself than, cleansing it later. Maybe, if during the cleanse, you could think about doing some kind of augmentation that is transforming the metadata to match the target system. So maybe you could put like a rule saying, if I see X format convert into Y format, or, if I see these, any dates that's before, let's say 2020 or something, flag it so we can correct it, right? So there are things that you could apply during this data preparation phase. All right, so review, map, cleanse, and augment if necessary. So if you go to the next slide, Angel. So now that you have prepared the data, right, we move into what's called the data validation or QC phase, right? So typically what we do is, in a GXP world, you would have a lower environment, your validation and test environment that mimics your production. So you want to kind of do like a sampling or a validation in your lower environment before you move into production. So some organizations do like 100% QC. If I have like 100,000 documents, they kind of QC every single document one at a time. If you're doing a multi-study transfer, this might not be possible. So it is preferred to move to risk-based approach. So some of the options that you may have is, maybe you can focus on, sampling certain documents across each zone. So you have 11 zones. Maybe you can, pick like square root of n+1 sample set of documents for each zone, or you can do just square root of n+1 for the entirety of the study. So it depends on the organization to what kind of risk-based approach you want to take. You could also maybe focus on certain zones which are more, critical for inspections. So let's say zone 5, or you want to maybe focus more on a certain kind of artifact, like your monitoring visit reports, right? So that maybe you can also focus on certain kinds of classifications and kind of do square root of n+1 in that area. Maybe you want to do on certain country or region or a site. I mean, it depends on your organization. So you can come up with a risk-based approach. This saves you time, and also kind of, you could focus on more on documents that are more important for the organization. Once you move into production, you would do like a similar kind of exercise in a production, because sometimes you might experience differences in a production environment. It's a totally different environment. So it's always, recommended to kind of do this kind of QC checks in the production. And lastly, are the checksums, right? So this is important to make sure that the content is not corrupted during this process. You're testing in an environment, again, you're moving to production. So do this checksum comparison between the source and the target to ensure that the data integrity is maintained. So in your metadata file, you have to look out for checksum metadata, and if it's not available, discuss with your source system to see if it can be included in the metadata file. This will help you to do the comparisons. All right, so we'll move into case study. And just before we go to the case study 1, we have a quick poll again.
All right. We have, I believe, have launched the poll. So the poll question is, and thank you for bringing this up, Nisi, does your organization follow the CDISC TMF reference model? And the questions are: yes, our studies, including transfer studies, follow the model. Yes, our studies follow the model, except for some legacy and or transfer studies. No, our studies in TMF do not follow the model, but my organization plans to adopt it. And finally, no, our studies in TMF do not follow the model. We don't have an in-house eTMF. Oh, I need to share the poll here. I'll open it up for just a few more minutes. All right, let's go over the results. Am I looking at the right poll?
Yeah, I think it's the first poll. I see the first poll.
All right, hold on. Oh, here it is. Here it is. I got to share it, and now I believe people can start to vote on it. they asked me backstage, they say, Aviv, do you think you can handle setting up the poll? I'm like, yeah, don't worry about it. I got this. And yeah. Famous last words. Let's see. I don't know why they can't answer it. Radio buttons aren't showing. We don't see the answers to select. Oh, this is, it's going well. It's going well from a poll perspective here. Let me try and share that again, see if that works. Doesn't seem to be working.
I think that's fine. Aviv, you tried your best. You tried your best.
Yeah. They're going to make me take off my TMF superhero t-shirt now. All right. I'll let you guys get back to it, and I'll see you in just a couple of minutes.
Thanks, Aviv. So as long as what I would say is, if you have the source and the target following the same model, I think that's a win-win. All right. So in the interest of time, we'll move into the case study. So have you experienced a scenario where the source structure is not at all following the CDISC TMF reference model? So here's a quick, background. There's a sponsor, say X, received a transfer of multiple studies from CRO I. The TMF structure is custom. All right, so there's no standard model, CDISC TMF reference model being followed, and each study has its own structure. Oh my goodness. And with variations in artifact names, even though the others same. So I'll just give you an example there when we say variations in artifacts names. Again, this is an experience from a recent transfer. So let's say there's one study and they have an artifact called ICF. It's informed consent form. So this study A from the same CRO has artifact listed as ICF, and another study has ICF spelled out, informed consent form. So you can imagine. So feel free to put your thoughts in the chat messages, like how would you approach, or maybe you've experienced the same scenario before, how would you have approached this? So one thing that we have done, at least for the instance, is, request the CRO to provide, if there's a template that they followed for each of these studies. The studies might have started at different points in time, maybe they have different versions, but it'd be good to give these versions, the template versions, to us instead of the metadata files, because it was so hard for us to kind of comprehend what's happening here. Because the CRO follows different variations, we thought about having a centralized mapping spec that we put in place for the CRO. It's not for the study, it's for the CRO. So anytime we see variations, we kind of added that into the mapping specs. We saw, okay, it's ICF, it's mapped like, ICF, informed consent form. Informed consent form is mapped to informed consent form. So we have a centralized mapping for the CROs. So throughout this process, what we made sure was we had this continuous communication with the CRO. So every time we found something that seemed off, we would go back to the CRO to kind of explain to us, maybe to kind of point to us in the templated version as to what that particular document is, what it's all about, its meaning, etc. So this is one of our interesting situations that we experienced. So I will hand it off to Angel for the second case study.
Great, thank you so much. So for the second case study, maybe you can put in the chat, what do you do if you don't have metadata files or audit trail files for the study that's moving into your eTMF system? And for our case studies, when we came across that, we where it was just not available, and maybe even the folder structure and the TMF index file names had no file naming conventions, and there was no industry standard followed or internal standard followed. What do you do? So for us, we just would note it in the data migration plan. We also would request that the CRO or ARO would provide a memo detailing what happened and what was going on in the prior system, and then try our best to build up the document inventory to the level of being more of a metadata file if possible. So, and we're very much interested to hear how you approached it, and if you could put those answers in the chat. But at this point, we're now at the takeaways. So, Nisi, what are our takeaways from this? session?
Well, the first thing is obviously you need to make sure there's an agreement with the two parties, right? So the one who owns the original source and the destination system location. So it's really important to have that agreement in place. Review your mapping specifications, your supplemental documents to confirm that they crosswalk properly between the source and the target. Angel?
Yeah, yes, and also just remember your lessons learned. So it's like a pathway. You're going through the pathway to mitigate risks for transfers and migrations as best as you can. Document those lessons learned and make sure that you leverage them for future transfers and migrations. And whatever you've come across, if it's not documented, it did not happen. So make sure that you do document it in migration memos and getting memos from the original source system owners. So that was it for our takeaways. And at this point, where we want to thank you.
Thank you.
There's a lot of sign language in A Quiet Place. And now, if you have any questions for us.
So we do have some questions from the audience, and I'll go ahead and share those with you. Give me one moment here. Can you see the questions on the screen here? Even though, there we go. Joanne, slide 12. Document. You called out and stated the CDIS TMF reference model. Is this now part of a regulation, or are modified other setups or structures still acceptable?
Sure. So just really briefly, we are aiming for it to become a standard, which is why it moved from DIA into CDISC. It is not a standard yet. And of course, other TMF indexes are acceptable, but obviously they need to be robust. They need to be close to a level of a CDIS TMF reference model. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, just to add to that, as it's there are many standards out, and so it's important that we kind of follow an industry standard, right? So this is more important when we do transfers and migrations between organizations. So if you all, as you saw in the case study, if you have different variations, you're going to run into problems. So it's always good to follow an industry standard like the CDIS TMF reference model. If you have setups and structures that are still out there and it's not following, well, it is what it is, but we have to deal with it through transfers and migrations and transformations. But think about for the future studies, why not follow the standard?
Thank you for an excellent question, Joanne.
It was a great question. I'll share another question from Nadia. In terms of tools, are there any efficient tools that can be used for the validation process?
So unfortunately, for us, with the kind of the qualities validation teams that we had in place, it was quite manual because of the different structures that we had. But we are exploring, there are great AI tools out there that can just literally compare to metadata files and point out any discrepancies. So do explore technologies. I know for sure there are technologies out there that you can leverage for validation, especially for the transfers.
And Nisi, question of my own here, and this probably comes up a lot, but where does AI come into play? The famous catch-all phrase AI, where does that come into play when it comes to these types of projects and processes?
So, where I would see as an example where AI would really benefit the organization is, just going back to the previous question of, we have unstructured data sets, right? That's out there. We don't know what you can do with it. There is no supporting audit trails, nothing that we can do. So this is where AI can definitely help. And we have seen this used in TMF a lot, like reviewing the content to understand what the content is all about, and then spitting out relevant, this is this artifact, it's this version, it's signed on X date, so that's a document date. It's in this language, right? So that's definitely going to help.
Okay. We have another great question from Joanne. So this is with regards to slide 15. The data review is a big task and hard for smaller organizations to execute. Additionally, there are other parties other than a CRO or an ARO providing data, i.e. core labs. Since this is highly specialized data, how are you approaching the review and verification of this transfer?
You want to take this, Angel?
Sure. So the approach to it is definitely a risk mitigation one. So as Nisi mentioned before, you got to focus on those documents that carry the highest risk, that are really important. Patient safety documents would be an example, and you still need to be able to sample them, especially if you're in a smaller organization. So using some kind of formula. So it might be the square root of n+1. If you have like 100,000 plus documents, you might need to do that twice, the square root of n+1. But you need to get some kind of sampling in place. I've only heard of one case at a previous TMF week where every single document was reviewed, and it turned out it was not done by the sponsor. It was done by a third party for the sponsor. So you definitely need to figure out what subset of documents and make sure that you're capturing key targeted areas of your TMF, and that you're including all the different file formats as well. So you might need to pull some if it didn't come across in your randomization formula.
And so and Joanne, if there's any clarity or additional clarity you want, let us know in the chat. But maybe a follow-up question for me on Joanne's question is, obviously this requires a lot of cooperation and collaboration with whatever third party you're working with, whether it's a CRO or an ARO doing the migration. How do you assure that you're negotiating an agreement with them that is going to meet all of those very granular expectations that you've just mentioned?
Well, I'll start, and if Nisi, if you want to add some parts to this, because I know that we had a very collaborative relationship on this, but you really need to start with your expectations. You need to dig into your eTMF systems, your transfer platforms, what would be acceptable for transfer platforms from the original source owners, and understand what the system requirements are. Build those into your expectations for transfers and migrations. That is going to be your blueprint for your eTMF transfer plans, your eTMF transfer agreements between the CROs and the sponsors. You build those in. They will need to adjust study by study, CRO by CRO, ARO by ARO, but start with your expectations. That's going to require research, and then move to your study specific transfer agreement template, and then tailor it for each of your studies. Nisi, did you have?
Yeah, I would echo that, Angel. I mean, so it's basically know your own process for the target, like know your own process, know your requirements, know your own deliverables. What is it that you really need to show that you're compliant, right? At the end of the day, it's all documentation. So if you know your own standards, your requirements, so that's the place to start with. And what Angel said, it varies between CROs. So this, you can share, this is what we need, what is it that you can provide to us, and then you'll go from there.
Okay, thank you. Another question here from Kin Jip. How long did the migration take on average according to your experience? So migration, TMF indexing, QC, and the whole suit and suspenders, or pants and suspenders, whatever that expression is.
Yeah, so in general, it took from the kickoff meeting to the actual transfer, that would vary between a couple of weeks to a couple of months. And in some cases, we would have the kickoff meetings early, in which case we would time out when the study would be ready for transfer, so when it was completing. for the actual the review period, that took between 2 and 4 months. Mostly it was a 3-month period, but that was that can pretty much that's based on the volume of studies that you have. So if you're just doing one study, it might not take you but a couple of weeks to complete all your data integrity reviews. So the whole process might conceivably be a month long from start to finish.
Like you said, setting expectations is key. And we'll take one more question here, and I think this is quite an easy one. Where can we find the CDISC reference model? Thank you, Taya, for that question. Maybe it was more challenging than I thought.
I mean, it's really out there. I mean, you see, we have a CDISC website. You can go out there and search for TMF reference model. It's already out there. I think we just released a latest version. So go out there and take a look. And I'm surprised that this question came up, because I thought pretty much everyone would know where to find the CDISC reference model.
No, and I'm glad this question came up because it is something that it is very important, and the information is out there. So I encourage everyone, just Google CDISC TMF reference model, and you'll find all of the information that you need.
And so, I put a plug for the CDISC, so I put a link to it in the chat for those people that are looking for it. It's a great resource.
It is. It really is a great resource. Now I have it's almost a little bit sad that I am presenting or introducing you to our ultimate TMF week session. Of course, I want to thank Angel and Nisi for an amazing session, super informative. We got some great questions, great engagement from the audience. So thank you very much. And Nisi, of course, you're joining us kind of from not kind of, actually, as you're on holiday. So we really do appreciate this.